destination for motorcyclists because of its amazing scenery and beautiful roads for riding. But every paradise has its snakes. In the first video, I focused on one of them, the changeable weather. Norway isn't Spain. It's almost guaranteed that it'll rain during your trip. But downsides can be mitigated. You can cope with the weather by having some decent rain gear, finding suitable accommodation, i.e. not a small tent, and a bit of stoicism or Buddhism. The second downside that most people talk about is that Norway is an expensive country. It's expensive to get to from the UK. Accommodation can be expensive. Meals, even a simple pizza, and especially alcohol, is expensive. So how much can it cost if budget isn't an option? I based my route this year on the Missenden Flyers videos from 5 years ago. He travelled with Motorrad Tours, who had plotted a route up to the Arctic Circle. Motorrad Tours charge £4,500 for this tour, and this includes the ferries from the UK to Holland and from Kiel to Oslo, all the accommodation in 3 or 4-star hotels, all the breakfasts and some of the evening meals for a total of 16 nights. And TMF reckoned that he spent an extra £1,500 on top of that for fuel, meal and other costs. And that's a total of £6,000. But you really don't have to spend anything like this much. I think it's a lot about lifestyle choices. My trip cost a total of £1,750, maybe a little more. And this is where the costs were. 1. The ferries to and from Norway. Since the ferry to Esbjerg in Denmark closed down for private passengers, you pretty much can't avoid the Harwich to Hook of Holland boat. It's not a bad route. It's overnight and arrives at 8 in the morning. My return trip with an inside cabin, which is the cheapest, cost me £360. On the way out, I ate in my cabin some food and a small bottle of wine that I bought in Morrison's, just close to the ferry terminal. On the way back, I enjoyed fish and chips and mushy peas in the cafeteria. It wasn't too pricey. The Motorrad tour spends a night in a hotel in Germany, then takes the ferry from Kiel in northern Germany to Oslo. I discovered the Holland-Norway line, which sailed from Emden, just over the Dutch border into Germany, to Kristiansand in Norway. The return fare was £782, so it's cheaper than the Kiel to Oslo route, and it saves one night in Germany. But you do end up further south when you arrive in Norway. And it was a new company, so it felt great to support them, and all their staff seemed super friendly and helpful. Sadly, they've just gone out of business, so the choices are limited again. So for me, the total cost of ferries getting to Norway from the UK and back was £1,142. Second, accommodation. Hotels in Norway are expensive. The prices I looked at before I left were between £120 to £180 per night. For the odd night, that's not too bad, but 12 or 14 nights at that price really mounts up. And if you add to that breakfast and maybe an all too convenient evening meal in the hotel, you could probably add half again on top of that. The other option, of course, is campsites or even wild camping. So the thing is, the choice you make, I think, isn't so much about the price. It's more about the style of travelling that you find fun. Some people would never ever consider it fun to be crouching by a small gas stove in a field, cooking a piece of steak or fish with noodles, and then stretching out on a sleeping mat. But for me, hotels, particularly chains, and most hotels seem to be chains, are completely interchangeable. Inside the hotel, you could be in Bolton or Bergen. Camping in Norway could cost as little as £20 a night. So for some travellers, choosing and buying super light camping gear is definitely part of the whole experience. But for me, the fun stops when the rain starts. The one night I did stay in a hotel was when I was soaking wet and everything on the bike was wet. But then I made a discovery, probably most of you already knew, and that is the cabins or huts on campsites. These little huts are spacious and dry compared to a tent. They have electricity, a fridge, a small stove, sometimes running water, and always a comfortable, reasonably comfortable mattress. They are perfect for drying out wet gear after a rainy ride and for staying warm and comfortable. You don't spend money on the swankiness of a hotel that you just don't want. So cabins cost between £30 and £45 a night. So for me, this changed the whole trip. And there are campsites everywhere, though not every campsite does have these cabins. With the Norcamp app on your phone, you can work out in advance which sites do have cabins. So for me, accommodation for 10 nights once I was in Norway, including that one night in the hotel, cost me a total of £360. 112 of that was that night in the hotel. Third thing, food and drink. So visitors to Norway are shocked by how much a nice meal out with a bottle of wine, or even a pizza and a couple of beers, can cost. Because I travel alone, eating out has never quite had that appeal that it does when you're in company, whether you're with a partner or a group of friends. So food from supermarkets that you can cook while camping is not expensive. The main challenge is finding small enough packs of things like meat for a single meal. And it's difficult to find somewhere open on Sundays. Supermarkets don't sell wine or spirits, or if they do, it must be very expensive. But they do sell beer that's up to 4.7% alcohol, which is kind of drinkable, definitely. And I always take a flask, maybe 600 mils or a litre of spirits on my trips. So it's nice in orange juice or on its own for when a little bit of strengthening is required. I also ate and had snacks of coffee and cakes in petrol stations. The quality was fine and actually the prices were reasonable. And of course, as you're travelling by road, they're the obvious convenient places to stop. I didn't keep receipts for food, so I can't say how much I did spend, but it was pretty much the same I would have spent if I were at home for 10 days. 4, travelling in Norway. Catching ferries is part of the travelling experience in Norway, and it's really fun. Obviously, the novelty would wear off if you actually lived there and you're just trying to get to work. But travelling southwards down the west coast involves taking lots of ferries. I forgot to take a note of how much each ferry cost, but looking at my bank statement later, they seem to total just £30. I feel that can't be right, but it probably wasn't much more than that. Petrol for the whole trip, from London to the Arctic Circle and back, cost roughly £220. So a 2-week trip from the UK to the Arctic Circle in Norway cost around £1,800, and it didn't feel like I was scrimping just to save money. Well, maybe on just 1 or 2 occasions. Norway doesn't have to be an expensive destination, but it can be if that's the style of travelling that you like.